of my mentors. He's a brilliant. He looked at about 200 scientific papers when it came to D, and he did a lecture on D. This was back around the time when I don't remember what got me into questioning D. There's usually something that spurs me on. I don't remember what it was, but I wrote my blog post on D, and then he came out with a lecture on D, and I was looking at it through sort of half closed eyes, hoping that I had interpreted the data right. And thankfully I had, because he really concurred and definitely brought up some more points that I wasn't aware of. But he was saying that if someone has enough 25 OHD, even if their total 25 OHD is, wait for it, only 15 ng/ml. So if you have your 25 OH at 15 ng/ml, but you have elevated 125 OH, then 15 ng/ml may be perfectly adequate, especially if you're healthy, you get outside, you get enough sunlight, right? You're generally a healthy person. 125 OH is an important marker that you probably haven't had run. All right, let's jump into the reference ranges. It is the wild, wild west out there when it comes to reference ranges. It is definitely, vitamin D is definitely being overdiagnosed. Again, we do not have an epidemic of vitamin D deficiency, and it's leading to unnecessary supplementation. Remember, I don't think I've said this yet. So before I get into what the various reference ranges are, to my point about these, vitamin D deficiency being overdiagnosed and leading to unnecessarily supplementation, in 2011, the Institute of Medicine, which is now called the National Academy of Medicine, is a very, very prestigious organization out of the US. They bring together scientists that look at a particular topic, and they dive deep into the research to come up with their conclusions. And in 2011, this is what the National Academy of Medicine said in a report about vitamin D. They said the committee finds that the prevalence of vitamin D inadequacy in the North American population has been overestimated by some groups due to the use of inappropriate cut points, reference ranges, right? The goalposts have really moved. When next week, I'll be interviewing a couple of Stanford professors. I want them to get into why. I'm not going to get into why so much. They talk about a researcher called Michael Holleck. They talk about how before the year 2000, under 10 ng/ml was considered deficient. Under 10, right? I mean, we've got people out there telling you should be up at 80. But before the year 2000, it was commonly accepted that under 10 ng/ml was considered deficient, but between 1998 and 2007, the reference ranges went up. They're going to talk about this in a lot more detail, but I'm just going to paint the picture here about how the reference ranges are absolutely obscene and what the reference range is that I go by. So the National Academy of Medicine, you've heard what they have said about it. They believe too that there is oversupplementation, and these cut points, these reference ranges are baffling. So we've got Dr. McCullough. Good old Dr. McCullough. So he recommends a reference range of your 25 OH, because no one seems to talk about 125 OH, of between 60 to 80 nanograms per milliliter. Okay. I went to his Instagram the other day just to see what he was up to. And he had a post that said vitamin D levels lower than 36.04 ng/ml was predictive of death from viral disease. We're going to talk about, again, I want you to keep thinking how low vitamin D is not necessarily contributing to these illnesses. It might be a consequence, not a cause, of these illnesses or death, as Dr. McCullough says. Huberman, Huberman, 40 to 60 ng/ml is what he recommends for 25 OH, and he says supplementation is often necessary. The Endocrine Society, deficiency is defined as less than 20 ng/ml, insufficiency as 20 to 29, sufficiency at 30. The National Academy of Medicine we spoke about, but their ranges, deficiency less than 12, insufficiency risk 12 to 20, and sufficiency is at 20 ng ml. The Merck manual, one of the oldest and most widely used clinical medicine textbook, reference textbooks, says 25 to 40 ng ml, it's quite high. Quest Diagnostics, upper limits is 100 ng ml. Douglas Hanley Moyer in Australia, 20 to 56 ng ml. LabCorp, 30 to 100 ng ml. Vitamin D Council USA, deficient at 0 to 40, sufficient at 40 to 80, absolutely insane. High normal, 80 to 100. The Vitamin D Council Australia says 20 ng ml is considered sufficient for most people to maintain bone health. Okay, so the reality is under 5 ng ml is where we really start to see a lot of these issues with low vitamin D start to surface. But I'm gonna let the Stanford professors that I'm going to speak to talk more about that. So the range is, 20 to 40 is kind of the range there. But then you've got the outliers like, the Vitamin D Council, sufficient up to 80, Dr. McCullough up to 60, Huberman, up to 60. So what is the optimal reference range then? So the range that I use for 25-OH anyway is 30 to 40 ng ml. That's actually come from my mentor, one of my mentors, Dr. Brian Walsh. He looked at over 200 studies, and that's what he came up with based on the mortality studies. But I'm open to moving on that as research presents itself. But I think that you're probably doing fine, especially after listening to the professors who I'm going to be interviewing. I think you're probably doing okay if you are even potentially between 20 and 30. Yeah. So we'll get into that in the podcast episode with them. So vitamin D is a threshold nutrient. So what this means is that your body does benefit from it up to a point, but beyond that point, more is not better and can actually be harmful. And so studies have shown that both low and high vitamin D is a problem, right? And is increased with mortality risk. One study highlighted that vitamin D between 15 to 20 may be entirely adequate for healthy individuals, especially since many living in sunny regions fall between that threshold, 15 to 20, right? So that's why I'm sort of saying I think 30 to 40 actually might be a little bit high. But yeah, we need to look at all this research and really come up with a good reference range. Another study, which was a cohort of individuals with COPD, found that the lowest incidence of cardiovascular disease mortality was observed when their 25-OH was between 20 and 24 ng ml. And the risk was increasing at both the lower end and the higher end. You'll see a lot of these are staying well under 30. And then we've got high quality randomized controlled trials and mortality studies that are showing that there's limited benefit from vitamin D supplementation. I'm going to say that again. So we have really good quality evidence, randomized controlled trials, mortality studies that are telling us that there is limited benefit to supplementing vitamin D. Unless a person is truly deficient. But what's the deficiency, right? When we've got studies arguing that 15 to 20 is fine, what's deficiency? Certainly, probably not what's on your piece of paper. We have one of these studies was the VITAL study, and it looked at vitamin D for preventing cancer and heart disease, and it found that it does not. Right? So it was a large double-blind study. It was over 25,000 people. The key findings were as follows. Vitamin D did not significantly lower the overall risk of developing invasive cancer. Vitamin D did appear to reduce cancer mortality. So it did help those who already were diagnosed with cancer to reduce their risk of dying from that cancer, but it did not prevent the cancer in the first place. Vitamin D did not significantly reduce the risk of major cardiovascular disease events, no significant reduction in heart attacks, strokes, or death from cardiovascular disease. And vitamin D had no significant effect on the overall risk of dying from any cause. Any cause. Even scientists have a hard time, I think, wrapping their head around this cognitive bias. There was this Hawaii study, which I've known about since back in the day when I started to look into this. This was a very interesting study. So there was 93 individuals in this study. They were healthy adults. They were in their 20s. They were surfers. They worked at a surf shop. They lived in Hawaii, right? Lots and lots of sun. And on average, these surfers got 28.9 hours of sun per week. That's a lot of sun. That's a lot of sun. And 22.4 of those hours were without sunscreen. And the researchers were shocked when they found that their levels were low. And I'm doing air quotes for those who are not watching on YouTube. These are air quotes. They thought their levels were low. Because if this study on Hawaiian surfers concluded that surfers who spend a lot of time in the sunshine aren't low in D, that makes sense. That's not very interesting. It certainly doesn't make for a good headline. Hawaiian surfers tend to be sufficient in D. It doesn't make for a good headline. So the researchers were shocked. How could these surfers be low? So what did the study define as low? Because that's really what this is all about. What are we defining as low? So as you've heard, you're likely not low at 20, right? So the study defined low levels of 25 OHD at under 30, because that was what was widely accepted as low, right? They didn't question whether perhaps their levels weren't actually low. Maybe that's what a healthy young person should be at, right? But instead, for these young, healthy, active, sun-drenched individuals, they said that their levels were low, right? So instead of these researchers saying, listen, maybe the reference ranges we've got are too high, maybe we need to rethink our reference ranges, they said that sun exposure is not a guarantee that you'll even make enough vitamin D. This is nonsensical. This is when we have to start to think critically and use common sense. Now, they did say, however, that we should rethink supplement goals. They said because the maximum 25 OHD level from natural sun exposure seems to be around 60 ngml, the study recommends that doctors should not try to achieve much higher levels than this through vitamin D supplements, as it might not be a natural or necessary target. So at least they said that. Then we had another study of a healthy European population in the Canary Islands, high sun exposure again. These individuals were not taking supplements and they found an average 25 OH level of 26 ngml, with 65.5% having levels below 30 ngml. Are these all individuals who just for some reason can't make D? And 23% below 20 ng and ngml. So this suggests what is considered optimal or sufficient by many of the guidelines might be way higher than what truly is necessary, right? And we might be overshooting the mark, causing some real big issues. And interestingly, again, remember I said with the increase of vitamin D supplementation, we've not seen a decrease in disease or mortality. Maybe it's because it's not working, it's not helping. We got it wrong. We need to rethink. The best and the safest way to get vitamin D, friends, spoiler alert, food and sunshine. I'd say supplements. Food and sun exposure. And you don't actually need a lot of sun exposure to get enough D. I don't have those numbers on me. I'm going to ask the ladies when they come on the podcast. But you actually don't need a lot of sun exposure. And of course, you don't go out and burn, but you do not be fearful of that sun like it's going to kill you if you're in it for 5 minutes without sunscreen on. That's ridiculous, nonsensical. We need sunshine. There is so much that we get from the sun beyond just vitamin D. And if you are slathering yourself in chemical sunscreens, always wearing long clothes and hats and being fearful of the sun, I think that you're doing yourself, your body, your health a great disservice. I let my kids be in the sun for about 20 odd minutes without sunscreen on. I live in Australia. They don't burn. They get all the wonderful goodies from the sunshine. Now, I'm very cautious not to, I speak to them about burning and the risks of that. We never want to burn, of course, but I think it's foolish to be scared of the sun because, and it's no one's fault. It's not, if you are one of these people, it's not your fault. It's not to shame you. You're not to know. So it's because you're being told, you're being marketed to, you're being told that sunscreen is the best idea, that the sun is incredibly dangerous, but I just don't believe that to be as true as first thought. Okay, so vitamin D, a consequence, not a cause of chronic disease. Let's get into this. Why are we thinking that supplementing with vitamin D is going to reduce our chance of getting a disease. It's because of observational studies. So these observational studies have really led us to believe that low D leads to disease, but that has not been elucidated in the scientific literature. Observational studies are when scientists, they learn about something in particular by watching what naturally happens. And there are some issues with this type of research, because observational studies do not show that association. They show an association, but that's not necessarily causation. So issues are that there's a lot of confounding factors in these observational studies. You can't control for a lot of the confounding factors. There can be selection bias because it's not randomized. Reverse causality, right? It's unclear what came first. That's the key point here. Association in these studies does not prove causation, right? So you got to be very careful. And even functional medicine doctors have been confused by these studies, or they just haven't looked into it and they've trusted what they've been told. We just can't. We can't. So observational studies do not prove that vitamin D is the driver of disease. And I've told you, we just went into some of these incredible studies that showed that vitamin D supplementation did not reduce the risk of many diseases, it does not prevent cancer or cardiovascular disease, right? So basically what this all means is that people who are already sick, people who already have an illness, may already have low vitamin D, right? They tend to have these low vitamin D levels to begin with. And this could be because they are, they're not outside, they're not getting sunshine, reduced sun exposure, reduced dietary intake. If they're chronically sick, depending on what's going on with them, they're not going to be consuming as much food. They're not getting it from their diet. They're not going to be outside. Maybe they're bedridden, right? But there are other things as well that can lead to this low D, which we'll talk about. So this is what we call reverse causation, right? It's very hard to rule this out when these studies don't adjust for it. Much of the COVID research was observational studies. So this is when people say to me, oh, but Tara, we have all this research to prove that vitamin D was having high levels was critical in preventing really poor outcomes from COVID. Listen, whatever high is, whilst it's probably true to a degree, because the people who did not get really ill from COVID or die from COVID, they were people who were healthy to begin with. The people who got really ill or died from COVID were very unhealthy people. We know this, right? Okay, I need a sip. This is a long episode. Okay, so remember that these types of observational studies, such as were most of the COVID ones, they're really useful for spotting trends, okay? But they cannot prove that vitamin D itself caused better or worse outcomes. And again, just to reiterate, we have a lot of these randomized controlled trials, these really good large scale studies to show that there is no meaningful reduction in disease risk when we take vitamin D supplementation, right? And this is particularly true for cardiovascular disease, for cancer, for inflammation, type diseases, diabetes, autoimmune disorders, etc. Okay, so I'm going to get into the risks of supplementing. Then we're going to talk about if you truly are deficient, why and what to do. But the other reasons why you might see that vitamin D is not a cause but a consequence of disease due to things like gut dysbiosis, low magnesium, poor glutathione, inflammation, right? So these are the types of things that can lower D. And so if you're ill to begin with, you're probably battling with some or all of those issues, which is lowering your D. And then these observational studies are confounding the issues and saying, well, if you've got low D, you can have a poorer outcome. But really, you're sick to begin with. You have low D because you're ill to begin with. So, of course, you get COVID or something else. Your chances of recovering well are not going to be as high. All right, risks of supplementing. So here are the risks of supplementing with vitamin D if you do not need it, which I think by now, when you're looking at your marker on your piece of paper, you probably realize you probably do not. So classical toxicity, hypercalcemia, right? The most well-established concern from supplementation. This is the classic vitamin D toxicity, hypercalcemia, which is just dangerously high levels of calcium in the blood. And this does occur when levels of 25-OH exceeds about 100 to 150 ng/ml. So other calcium-related issues as well. So excess calcium in the urine is also a consideration when we're even in low levels of supplementation, this can actually occur. One study found that individuals who were just given 800 to 2,000 IU per day for a year, 30% of these develop this calcium in the urine. Most people are taking 2,000 a day. Some people come to me on 10,000 a day. It's just insanity. Increased risk of falls in older adults. So high intermittent doses or ongoing supplementation that pushes that 25-OHD level above 45 ng/ml may contribute to fall risk in some populations. And this is particularly relevant when there's a bolus dose, a really high dose, rather than this consistent daily intake. And I know that there are a lot of people out there who are taking like 50,000 or more IUs once a week, right? That's a bolus dose of D. Impact on bone mineral density. So again, contrary to popular belief, vitamin D supports our bone health. It doesn't always mean that you're going to support your bone health if you're supplementing with D. So we had a Calgary study that followed healthy individuals, healthy adults who did not have osteoporosis, and they took between 400, which is considered quite low by many, 4,000 or 10,000 units of D a day for 3 years. Those taking 4,000 or more experienced a statistically significant reduction in bone mineral density compared to the low dose group, right? So this study concluded that this vitamin D supplementation did not confer bone health properties and actually could be quite harmful to bones. Then we have mortality risk at very high levels. Small number of studies have reported that very high levels of 25-OHD may be associated with an increased risk of mortality. So possible reasons include that reverse causation, people with chronic illness taking high doses of vitamin D, right? A lot of people out there who have a chronic disease have been told by their well-meaning physician practitioner to take a whack of vitamin D every single day. Well, this could actually suppress their active form of D. Remember, we have that regulatory mechanism in the body. High vitamin 125-OH pushes down that 25-OH, and this really can be linked to adverse outcomes. All right, if you truly are deficient, this may be why. And so this is what you want to think about. Before you go reaching for that vitamin D supplementation, it should never be the first line of defense, in my opinion. So here's what we want to think about. Again, the body is way smarter than we are. Just keep that in mind, okay? And so if your body is lowering your 25-OHD, check your 125 to start, right? But if you do have really low levels, and what are they, right? What are really low? Under 15, under 10, then let's look at why. Let's address that root cause, right? It's a warning sign, just like anything else in the body. Low albumin, it's a warning sign. Well, if you truly have low vitamin D, it's a warning sign. And so here's what you can think about doing. So you want to optimize your minerals, in particular your calcium and your magnesium. So calcium increases the half-life of vitamin D, which can help to elevate and stabilize that 25-OH. So think about calcium. This is where run an HTMA test. I love the HTMA tests. Hair tissue mineral analysis. They never fail me. I just keep coming back to them time and time again. You really can't rely on blood work for minerals. You're not going to get an accurate picture of what's going on at the tissue level. Magnesium. So enzymes that are responsible for activating and breaking down vitamin D, they do depend on magnesium. Most people are deficient in magnesium, or they have what we call a magnesium loss that we see on the HTMA. It's when they're leaking that magnesium out of the body. So you really do need to optimize your magnesium. Everybody should do this and probably needs to do this. Because if that magnesium is deficient, then vitamin D supplementation may not work. And this is actually known as magnesium-dependent vitamin D resistant rickets in some of the research. And when the researchers added back in magnesium, they saw that you could actually restore the body's ability to respond to vitamin D in these patients who had rickets, which is really not very common, not in the Western world anyway. A randomized controlled trial found that magnesium supplementation influenced vitamin D levels depending on a person's baseline status as well. So if vitamin D levels were moderate, which they said was around 30, then magnesium did increase 25-OH, but do we really need to above 30? And when vitamin D levels were higher, around 50, magnesium actually decreased both 25-OH and its breakdown product. So that's Fascinating, right? So what does that suggest? It suggests that magnesium has this regulatory effect on vitamin D, right? It supports levels when levels are low, and it will actually support bringing those levels back into balance if those levels are a little bit too high. And listen, magnesium will never fail you. And supplementing with magnesium on its own, great. But again, you really need to do an HTMA because you could be leaking that magnesium out of your body. It's not being held onto because maybe you're stressed or you have low boron or low B6 or an imbalance with calcium, sodium, even potassium. You've got to balance them all together to actually get that mineral into the cell where it actually can perform all its functions. It's not just about, oh, I've just ticked that box, I'm taking magnesium. It's not as simple as that. As we've learned in this podcast, most things in the body, nutrients in the body, they don't behave in a black and white simplistic fashion. Glutathione and oxidative stress. So studies show that low levels of 25-OHD can occur alongside low glutathione and high oxidative stress. Again, think about it. When somebody's really ill, what do they have? Do they have really robust glutathione and really, and really low oxidative stress? Usually not. So if you've got low glutathione, our master antioxidant in the body, and a lot of oxidative stress, then this vitamin D will fall, right? So again, low vitamin D, a consequence of illness, not low vitamin D contributing to the illness, right? So think about your glutathione. Glutathione appears to support demetabolism. It influences key genes that are involved in the activation, the transport of vitamin D. So you might want to supplement glutathione or look at some other blood markers for glutathione. Think about your oxidative stress. What are you eating? Are you eating the rainbow? Can you incorporate foods and other things that can reduce that oxidative stress? A good practitioner can look through your blood work and really determine if oxidative stress is part of your picture, and low glutathione. Pollution exposure. Yeah, we've had lots of studies looking at this. Air pollution blocks UV rays, right? Reduces your ability to synthesize that vitamin D from sunlight. And your microbiome. So your gut microbiome, and again, this circles back. I always circle back to run HTMA testing and gut testing. Don't faff around with all these other tests. You're always going to go somewhere and get bang for your buck when you run these two tests side by side, no matter what you're working on, whether it's your D or something else. So your gut microbiome can influence vitamin D metabolism. So when your gut health is compromised, it can definitely impact how your body will absorb and activate vitamin D, right? So this inflammation plays a big role here. And what regulates inflammation? Our gut bacteria, they either drive inflammation or lower inflammation. And this inflammation can really impact how we're converting 25-OH to 125. It can increase it. It can deplete the 125 and it can deplete the 25-OH, the storage, and increase the 125. I spoke about this before. Autoimmune disease, typically we've got inflammation. Gut dysbiosis, we're probably going to have inflammation. Chronic illness, we're having inflammation. Metabolic dysfunction, we've got inflammation. And that inflammation will impact enzymes that will push down your 25-OH, the one that that's being tested, and will bring up your 125. So you don't want to supplement in that case. Right? So you haven't got a true deficiency in that case. So inflammation, key reason why vitamin D might appear low on a lab test, despite adequate sun exposure or even supplementation, right? Dive deeper, do 125, look at the gut, work on inflammation. Okay, so we've got a lot of papers on chronic inflammation causing low vitamin D, right? Rather than low vitamin D causing inflammation. Okay, I'm just having a look here. Yeah. Okay, medications as well, antifungals, glucocorticoids, anticonvulsants, they may impair vitamin D metabolism in the body, and fat mass as well. So just losing weight can help your 25-OH levels. Vitamin D is fat soluble, and so it can actually become trapped in fat tissue, reducing its bioavailability in the bloodstream. So, we have seen in research, even when obese individuals have got a lot of sunlight, their vitamin D levels may not actually rise. So weight loss, lifestyle changes alone without any vitamin D supplementation have been shown to increase vitamin D levels. Exercise can help release vitamin D from fat tissues from fat stores, and this can increase circulating vitamin D levels. We have a study on that. Yeah, so those are the types of things, right? Those are the things that you want to think about. If you truly are deficient, but you probably are not, you think about those things first and foremost before you try to bully or strong arm the body to increase your 25-OH. And try to just assume that, because that's not functional medicine. That's not root cause medicine, right? So bottom line, we're going to wrap up now. You want to test, if you're going to rely on testing, which we probably shouldn't, but definitely test 25-OH and test 125-OH for a complete picture, number one. If you can, you want to do the liquid chromatography tandem mass spectrometry. If you can get that, that's the gold standard. Use the reference ranges, or, obviously I've bounced around a little bit, but I wouldn't say anything above 30 for 25-OH. I haven't given you the 125. But again, I think that my reference ranges are going to deviate a little. And I do think that we need to look at the individual as well. But we're going to have more come to light, I think, in the coming years for reference ranges. But I would definitely say that around the 20 to 30 ng, you're probably A-OK for 25-OH. And then if you truly are deficient, obviously you want to look at all those potential reasons for why you might be deficient first and foremost before heading out and grabbing a supplement. Get enough sunshine, get out into the sunshine every day. Yeah, you could, you want to not wear your sunglasses. Believe you can make vitamin D through your eyes. Obviously in the wintertime, you're going to be rugged up a little bit more. But in the summertime, get out there, get your vitamin D. Don't burn, but don't fear the sun. But just obviously don't burn. And you actually don't need a lot. Again, come back and listen to the next episode, because I'm going to go into how much sunlight do we actually need to synthesize enough vitamin D. I'm going to ask that question to the ladies who I'm going to be interviewing. So that's it. Just remember, vitamin D is a warning sign. It's not something to be overridden by supplementation. Vitamin D is not a magic pill. It's not a cure-all. It's not doing that. Hasn't been doing that. In fact, it could be dangerous. And really work to support the body as per normal. If you support the gut, you support minerals, diet, lifestyle, things typically even themselves out. So I hope you found that interesting. Again, please do share this out, because your family members, your friends, they are likely taking D. So share this out. Let's get the message out there that, there is not an epidemic of vitamin D. We have been misled, and we've been misled about a lot of things, and we will continue to be as time goes on. But I really do hope that you found that interesting and that really made you stop and think a little bit. If you want my help, the best thing to do is head to the show notes. I have a link there. You can book in a consultation with me. I'll do a 30-minute consultation with you. Bring your vitamin D labs. We can talk about your health. We can look at your bloods. That's probably the best way to really talk to me and get my opinion about where you're at with your health and what the next best steps are for you. Otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful day or evening, and we'll speak again soon. Bye for now. I am not a medical professional, and the information provided in this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. I do not have access to your individual medical history or circumstances, so the content discussed here should not be considered as medical advice. Before making any changes to your diet, lifestyle, or considering the use of supplements, please consult with a qualified healthcare professional or your doctor to ensure it's safe and appropriate for your specific situation. Any decisions you make based on the content of this podcast are at your own discretion and risk. Thank you for tuning in.